How you guys doing? Once again, the Hitch Hiker is back in town, and last time I did one of these blogs on black superheroes, I didn't realize how popular it actually would become. At the time, I was kind of like rediscovering my love for the Legion of Superheroes, and I read an article by Paul Levitz talking about the creation of Tyrock. Now for a brother back in the 60s, 70s growing up and everything, Tyrock to me was like, wow, this guy's mad cool. Even though he's walking around in a white mankini, he just was like, had the fro, and in the future of the 30th century, here was finally, this black hero. The Legion of Superheroes came out in the 60s, and, they were running around with blue people, orange people, green people, talking about unity, and we also had Star Trek that preached the same thing. So finally in the 70s, came, this guy, in a white mankini with, of course, chains wrapped around his chest. And, he had the voice to die for, Tyrock had sound-inducing powers that when he goes, all this kind of stuff, he can open up portals and, cause explosions and all kind of craziness. And, we still thought it was mad cool. Now, when I did my first blog around black superheroes, I was kind of like noticing that, isn't it very strange that Tyrock actually sounds a lot like Jim Kelly from Enter the Dragon? Or, for me, from Three the Hard Way, he was a brother who was kicking butt in Black Belt Jones and, taking down evil cops, the man, and, making all these weird sounds. And I thought, hey, I'll do a blog around this. And when I did, and I figured, hey, well, look, I'll just take a look at, black superheroes around the time. And, I've also did like lectures around this, and I kind of like always try to tease people, with that trick quiz question, like who was the first African-American superhero. And, everybody will say the Black Panther because, they'll say, hey, man, Black Panther, he was first, man. You know how it is because he's Black Panther, power to the people. But, the trick question was Black Panther actually was the first African superhero, whereas at the time I actually believe the Falcon was the first African American superhero. Now, on my blog, I talked about this, and I talked about all the other, black superheroes that came afterwards, like in the 70s and everything. And lo and behold, I was wrong. I even had this debate just recently, that, when I would say, hey, who's the first African-American superhero? People would say, yeah, it was Black Panther, man. Or they would say it was the Falcon. But we were both wrong. So I figured maybe it's time for another blog. Another reason why I wanted to do this blog was because actually the real inspiration was I'm looking forward to the new Superman, Batman, Superman, World's Finest, Justice League hitting. Who knows what it's actually going to end up being called when it finally comes out. Zack Snyder's new movie involving two of DC's, well, really the trinity of DC's finest. So rumor now came out that Cyborg is going to be added to the cast. And actually, this was the start of this rant. I planned on doing a rant blog about why the hell does DC and so-called DC Productions feel that when they want to have a black hero, superhero, so to speak, their first go-to guy is Cyborg. I was a big fan of Smallville, and lo and behold, Cyborg enters the play, and everybody always seems to get it twisted. Here's a guy who was a high school football star, and his father was a scientist looking like George Washington Carver, and his son accidentally gets exposed to this interdimensional energy that destroys half of his body, and his father has to turn him into a human cyborg. Now, in recent retcon years, Cyborg has become pretty much a Terminator type of, not a Terminator, a Transformer type of character. And, he seems to represent the black DC universe, and it's really kind of like infuriates me because there's so many other choices. I mean, Jon Stewart is like my first go-to choice. So when I was looking at that, I said to myself, wait a minute, I remember, the 80s when Cyborg came out, and guess what? He had a white mankini. I mean, does nobody forget this? Because we all see this big steel, metal, gray looking cyborg in recent years. But he came out with a mankini. And he also had a sound cannon. What is it with DC? I mean, is it just that black people are loud? Is it that? Is it that? Is it that they feel like, hey, the show, let's figure out what powers can we give our black heroes. I don't know, how about they're loud? So a sound cannon, in his fist. Yeah, he's a cyborg with a sound cannon. But he must wear a mankini, though, I must say. I mean, because they really got a big package, those black people. And there we have it. Cyborg, comes out in DC Comics Presents Teen Titans, the new iteration of the 80s version of the Teen Titans. And Cyborg is invented. So then I realized, let me do some research this time. Before I do another blog, I'm going to research this. So, what I'm going to do is not only is Cyborg and Tyrod pretty much interwoven in the same characters, but let's go back even further. So before we go back in time, let's just look at the 70s, because for most of us, the Silver Age is when DC finally decided to jump on the black hero bandwagon and, start creating these heroes. So, when we look at Marvel, and we look at Black Panther, and we look at the Falcon, let's look at their timelines. So, the Black Panther actually was created in 1966, and he appeared in Fantastic Four 52. Now, an interesting story I read when I did the research was Jack Kirby invented the Black Panther, and he originally wanted to call him the Cold Tiger. Why? I don't know. But I don't see that name lasting in history. Does anybody else? The Cold Tiger. Oh, here comes the Cold Tiger. Because it's charcoal black. Get it? Oh, I don't see that one happening. But then somebody, maybe Stan Lee, must have said, hey, look, man, just call him the Black Panther. Now, here's an interesting factoid. When we talk about that, I'm going to jump through time as I normally do. But I'm going to go all the way back to 1954. And in 1954, Jungle Action used to be with Atlas Comics. And they actually decided to create what was, at the time, considered the first mainstream black hero. And he was, let's think about this. He was a tribal chief, and his name was Waku, W-A-K-U. Waku, and the title of the comic was Waku, Prince of the Bantu. And this was for Atlas Comics. And it lasted for a year, believe it or not, which was hard at those times when we're going to look at this history. So Waku, Prince of the Bantu, was the first mainstream black hero for Atlas, which was the precursor for Marvel. Now, what is interesting about it is, think about it. Waku, Wakanda. Tribal chief. Stan Lee was working in the press room at the time. And so, literally, 10, 11 years later, Jack Kirby comes up with the idea of Prince T'Challa, a tribal chief from Africa, the Cold Tiger. And Stan does one of his things. Come on, Jack. They got this Black Panther movement going on and everything like that. We want people to buy into this book. So why don't we just change him to the Black Panther instead of the Cold Tiger? And Jack goes, all right, Stan, why not? And so he comes from Africa. Where does he come from? Waku, 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 Wakanda. Makes sense. Yeah, these guys, they're great. So anyway, let's move on. So, first mainstream black hero from Atlas in 1954 was Waku, Prince of the Bantu. Now, let's go further back. Let's go back in time, yeah. So, and we go all the way back to the pulp comics and everything. When we had the Shadow and the Phantom, there was Mandrake the Magician. And Mandrake the Magician was the first magician hero and everything. Just a guy in a suit with a cape, but he had magic powers. But he also had a team of people. So he had the first team book kind of way, but it was still named after him, Mandrake the Magician. And his sidekick was, again, an African tribal chief. You know, these guys really, you know, where did these black heroes come from? They all come from Africa, damn it. That's where they come from. And if they're going to be a hero, they have to be a chief, you know, and all that other kind of stuff. So Mandrake had a sidekick named Lothar. And this was 1934. Now, what it was interesting is, like, Lothar, who was a tribal chief, he was also known as the Prince of the Seven Nations, you know, but he still was black, right? He still was kind of like a gollywog type of character. So, you know, like, he couldn't, like, speak proper English or anything else like that. And he wore animal skins and loincloths, a lot of bare chests, like John Henry or whatever. But he's a hero. So, because Mandrake had to be human, so that way everybody could relate to him, Lothar could do anything. Believe it or not, Lothar was invulnerable. Lothar was impervious to heat. He was impervious to magic. You know, nothing really could stop Lothar. It's kind of like Lothar going, I'm Lothar. And, you know, and he was also kind of like treated like a circus strongman. You know, and, but, you know, that was our first black hero, 1934. Lothar. And finally, when they, you know, kind of like retconned him, you know, in the 60s, I believe it was the 60s, Lothar, you know, they decided, hey, look, even though he's still going to be an African, you know, like, we'll give him suits and we'll have him talking proper English and, you know, let's give a little bit more respect here instead of having a black guy running around in a loincloth. Thank you, guys. So, Lothar, 1934, our first hero. That's great. So then as we move on into time, believe it or not, you know, it wasn't like the big companies back then. It wasn't like big DC versus Marvel, you know. There was Atlas, there was Timely, there was National Comics. So what it was, you had a lot of different independents. So believe it or not, before Milestone came around in the 90s, there was an actual independent called All Negro Comics. I don't know actually who was behind this, but this is pretty interesting because it was 1947 that they created their own hero named Lion Man. Not Lionel, Lion Man. And can anyone tell me what was Lion Man? A tribal chief? No. No, but he was a scientist in Africa. Wow. So Lion Man was a scientist who went on a uranium dig and somehow had the powers of a lion, and it only lasted one issue, so we don't need to go on. 1947 though. So first we had Lothar the sidekick, and then came Lion Man for one issue. Now, the thing about it is, you got to give it up to these comic creators because it wasn't like they weren't trying. They just didn't know what to do. So they realized that they should have, you know, a dark skin or African American, well, you know what they were called back then, characters. So it had to be something that dealt with Africa or, you know, animals. I don't know. But anyway. After 1947, we already talked about another tribal chief, which was Waku, the Prince of the Bantu. And that was 1954. Now, I'm skipping over, our man Whitewash Jones, we talked about before in the last blog, because even though he came out in the 40s with the Young Allies and he was always the permanent Penelope pit stop victim, he's the master. And we're not even going to go anywhere near Ebony White for the spirit sidekick. We're talking about heroes right now. So, 54... Waku, Prince of the Bantu. So right now we have 3. So in a span of 1934 to 1954, a span of 20 years, we got 3 black heroes. So can't say that they didn't exist. Now, I'm not going to talk about the Red Mask at this point, even though I'm still researching him. This Caribbean, hero who, way he was drawn as kind of like a black character, but it still is kind of vague, about his mystery origins. But just kind of remember we talked about the Red Mask, a pulp hero who we believe was black. So anyway, moving on. So now we're moving into the 60s. And pretty much, the war is on. You had Korea, but then Vietnam is building up. And so what happens is that at this time, remember how we had that whole thing where Marvel and DC's characters kind of like went down for a minute. And we went to horror comics and war comics. So we have pretty much 2 wartime black heroes, because it was like the brothers got into the war, or they were really good fighters. So we have both from DC, we have Sergeant Rock's Easy Company, and from Marvel we have Sergeant Fury's Howling Commandos, and they each had a essential black character in the cast. So in 1961 we have Jackie Johnson for Easy Company. Now, he had his own, he appeared in an issue that they say was centered around him called Eyes for a Blind Gunner. And, but my memory strikes me right. I think in later issues, because Sergeant Rock's team started to take on not superpowers, but the ethnic diversity, and where one guy has feathers in his head and everything, and another guy is called Ice Cream Johnson. But I was kind of curious. Maybe people could just let me know. Was Ice Cream Johnson Jackie Johnson, or was that just another character? But the main one for Marvel was Gabe Jones for the Howling Commandos. And what's cool is he was played by my man Derek Luke in the first Captain America First Avenger movie. And also in my favorite show that's on now, Marvel Agents S.H.I.E.L.D., the new character Triplet, they say how he is the descendant of a Howling Commando, which the only Howling Commando he could be a descendant of pretty much would be Gabe Jones. So, and he's a real cool character, so that's really nice. So nice touch there, guys. So the 60s didn't just stop there, because as we said, 1966 Black Panther came out. And he first appeared in Fantastic Four, as I already stated, but eventually he got his own series as well in the 60s. But that came in 1967. Now, this is just only small, but just kind of like notes. It's worth notating that a supporting character played by a prominent black character was Joe Robertson in the Spider-Man mythos of the Daily Bugle. And even though he didn't have any superpowers, I just thought it was nice that he was invented as a strong black man in 1967. But in 68, which is really interesting, 1968 brought us Hobie Brown. And Hobie Brown was the Prowler. Now, the Prowler started out as a villain, and I am going to talk about villains in this, but the Prowler started out as a villain, but Spider-Man kind of changed him around, and, he would become kind of like an anti-hero. So he was kind of like our first black anti-hero, was the Prowler, whereas like he was still a cat burglar, he still kind of like worked for bad guys from time to time, but he also kind of worked for the greater good. So that's kind of nice. And that was 1968. Now, where that brings us to is DC finally saying, hey, yo, we got to get in on this market. I mean, we got the Legion of Superheroes. People complaining that Paul's not creating any black characters and stuff like that. So what are we gonna do? So they had their gods, aliens characters, the Forever People, which were also the New Gods. And so within that, they created their first black hero, or African American hero, which was Sergeant Willie Walker, who became known as the Black Racer. He's that guy that goes around on the skis, and they're black. And, flying through the air and all that. Doesn't talk much, but his origin is that he was a sergeant and, he became a new god. So yeah, DC jumped in the bandwagon in 1971. Now, before I go into the 70s, I gotta hit us with 1969. 1969, the tunes of 1969 brings us the Falcon. Now, this is the thing that I learned, which was new and really interesting. Is that when I first said, hey, the Falcon's first African American hero, yeah? And, that seemed to be pretty cool because, like I said, a trivia question. But what I didn't realize, and I had to go back and, actually find some of the reprints of Captain America, is that I thought that the Falcon was a con artist or a hustler, named Snap Wilson, like in the retcons or whatever, they kind of mention that. Now, also, too, is that I started to realize, wait a minute, hold on, man. The Falcon wasn't always wearing red and white. When he first came out, he was wearing green and gold. What the hell is that all about? And when he first came out, he didn't have any wings. So the Falcon didn't even fly. What's that all about? So I was like, wait a minute, hold on for a second. So when the Falcon first appeared, it was during the time when Captain America and Rick Jones were about to kind of sever their ties. Rick Jones was running around in Bucky's costume, and and Captain America, his identity is exposed, and he has to come up with a new identity. And just lo and behold, Red Skull shows up with the Cosmic Cube, or the Tesseract for those of you in the present day. And so Captain America is like, hey, what am I going to do here? I need a new identity. And the Red Skull says, well, be me. Right? And so with that, Red Skull turned Captain America into the Red Skull. And then he figured, I'm going to put you on an island full of my enemies, my old gang, the Exiles. And so Captain America appears on the island with the Exiles, and they all hate the Red Skull. And what happens is that they decide to kill the Red Skull, but he's actually Captain America. So Captain America is fighting for his life, because he doesn't have a shield, and he's going up against guns and these big enemies and stuff like that. And lo and behold, he's saved by a Falcon, Red Wing. And Red Wing is being controlled by this African running around like Man Friday, saying, hey, what's up? And we were like, okay, that's our first look at the Falcon, because he was a Falconeer. And it turns out, his origin was that he was a kid in Harlem, and, instead of having pigeons and pigeon coops and stuff like that, he had pet falcons. He started out with pigeons and moved to falcons, and he realized he had a kinship. And he answered an ad. This is how bad the writing was back then. He answered an ad that the Exiles put in the paper saying, hey, look, we're so bored. Any falconers out there? Stupid. So the Falcon answers the ad, goes to Africa to be a falconer for these people, and it turns out that these people want a falconer because they actually, want to capture the Falcons and somehow take over the island of these Africans. And so Snap Wilson realized, hey man, that's not cool. And starts to fight back to these guys. At the same time, Captain America shows up and the identity of the Red Skull. So when Captain America actually hooked up with the Falcon for the first time, he wasn't Captain America, he was the Red Skull. And he trained Falcon how to fight. So it was like, okay, so he trains him in like an hour to give him all these math skills for, a couple of panels. And then he says, hey, look, you know, what you need is a costume. You need to inspire these people. And so, like, why not be the Falcon? And he's like, are you kidding me, man? I ain't gonna wear no suit. You know, I ain't one of those kind of dudes. And he says, well, this is about a symbol and inspiration. And he goes, all right, he goes for it. Now, remember, unrealistically, this guy is not Captain America telling him to do this. This is just some random dude on the island saying, hey, man, be a symbol. And he goes, okay. You taught me how to fight. That's cool. And so they're fighting the exiles. And Red Skull doesn't like it. And so Red Skull comes back and he goes, look, man, I'm bored with you being me. So I'm going to turn you back into you. And I ain't give you your shield and everything. I don't know where it was. Well, I got a cosmic cube. And the Falcon's like, oh, dude, Sweat, man, you're Captain America. I can't believe it. So now he's all even more pleased that Captain America trained me how to fight and give me this costume. And so let's fight together and let's kick butt. And that's what they did. And that was the origin of the Falcon.